Well, good morning and happy Monday to everybody. As we begin our time together, I wanted to respond to two of John's announcements from yesterday. First, he announced that I tested positive for COVID-19. So here's the brief story. This past Thursday, I started to feel some aches in my legs and lower back and realized that I had a low-grade fever. Friday morning, when I felt the exact same way, I decided to go get tested. The results came back positive. So I immediately started quarantining. Beth is away at Grand Valley, so her bedroom in the basement is open. So I immediately moved down here and have been here ever since. And I felt pretty much the same way every day. Muscle aches in my back and legs, low grade fever, and tired. I've taken naps most afternoons. But other than that, I have felt pretty good. And for that, I'm very thankful. Now, I realize that COVID impacts everybody differently. I realize that the symptoms come on at different rates and different intensities with everybody. So I realize I'm not out of the woods. I continue to do everything I can to take care of myself. I realize I'm not out of the woods, but I'm hopeful because it's been so mild so far, and I hope it continues to stay mild. And I'm thankful for those of you who have reached out to me with a text or an email saying you're praying for me and my family. Your encouragement and your love and support means a lot. So thanks for that. And Nikki and the kids feel pretty good. They haven't noticed anything. Ironically, on Friday, the day I tested positive, Nikki got her first dose of the vaccine. So she's both been exposed and vaccinated. So who knows what that means? But hopefully that's good news for her because she'll have her second dose of the vaccine here in a couple of weeks. But again, thanks for your prayers. So far, so good. And we'll certainly keep you updated. The second thing that I wanted to follow up on was John's announcement about Andrew and about how Andrew is now going to be working part-time for our denomination, Converge Mid-America, as a director of church strengthening. We've been working together for many, many years now. And you know that we all have different strengths and different personalities and different abilities. And you recognize as well as we do that Andrew is the shepherder, Andrew's the encourager. Andrew is one who fulfills those roles very well. And that's something that we recognize. And it's something that Converge Mid-America has recognized. And so as they look at the churches, the 90 churches that Andrew will be responsible for between Michigan and Indiana, many of those churches are solo pastors. Many of those churches are struggling during a difficult time. Many of those churches need guidance, need encouragement, and they recognize that Andrew would be a great one to shepherd them and to work with them. And I just want to say how wholeheartedly I support that. I do think Andrew's uniquely gifted to fulfill that role. I think he's going to do an exceptional job in that role. I think he's going to provide churches that which we take for granted. Having a multi-staff co-pastor model, we regularly have a source of encouragement. We can talk through issues. We can lead together. And we realize that not every church has that. And so Andrew's going to provide some of that. And we think he's going to do an absolutely fantastic job. So I'm excited for Andrew. I'm excited that he's still going to be around on a part-time basis. So still help us lead, still help us teach, still help us preach. And do all of the things that he does. Certainly responsibilities are going to shuffle a little bit, but I'm excited about it. I just think it's a good move for Andrew. I think it's a good move for Converge. And like John said yesterday, the most important thing is that it's a good move for the kingdom of God. And that's what we need to be about. So I'm excited about that. So now with just a couple of minutes left, I do want to dive into Mark chapter 12, because that's where we're going to be this week. I encourage you to read Mark chapter 12, 1 to 13 today, 1 to 12 today. In this, Jesus tells the parable of a vineyard. It's a vineyard who, like they did quite frequently in Jesus' day, there would be a landowner who would rent out the vineyard to tenants. And the tenants had the responsibility of nurturing and taking care of the vineyard. And then every once in a while, the landowner would come and he would receive a share of the crops. Receive a share of what was produced in that vineyard. Jesus' parable is how when the landowner sends his representatives to receive his share of the crops, They treat him poorly. They beat him. In some instances, they kill them. And this happens time and time again. It's important to remember the context in which Jesus tells this parable, because Jesus is continuing to dialogue with the Jewish leadership, and they are questioning his authority. And so this is a parable against the Jewish leadership of Jesus' day. You remember what Israel was called to be. Even back in Genesis chapter 12, when God called Abraham, they were called to be an instrument of blessing to the nations. Israel was not to keep God for themselves to the exclusion of everybody else, but that they were to represent God to the world. They were to make God known to the world. They were to be God's vehicle, God's instrument of blessing. Unfortunately, and we read this throughout the Old Testament, Israel often failed to do that, primarily because the leadership of Israel often failed to do that. And so in the parable, the representatives that God continues to send, that they continue to reject, to beat up, and to even kill, is representative of the Old Testament prophets, those prophets whom God sent to Israel, reminding them of their task and calling them back into a relationship with God, words that were repeatedly ignored. Well, as Jesus continues this parable, the landowner in the parable has one final idea. He says, I will send my son, and they will receive my son. But how do they treat the landowner's son? The same way they treated the other representatives. They kill him. And this is a statement of judgment about how the Jewish leadership is going to treat Jesus. They are going to treat Jesus just like previous Jewish leaders treated the prophets. They're going to ignore him, they're going to reject him, and they're going to kill him. And so the parable concludes with Jesus announcing judgment. Verse 9, what then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. The Jewish leadership had failed. The Jewish leadership over centuries had rejected God's prophets, and now at this moment they had rejected God's son, and were going to kill God's son. Because of that, the Jewish leadership would have to be removed as the leadership of God's people, God's instrument to bless the world. And really, even though the text isn't clear that the vineyard is going to be given to others, theologically, the vineyard is being given to the church. And it is now the church, the multi-ethnic, multinational church, that takes the place of being God's representative, being God's instrument to the nations. Now, this is not to say that Jewish people, members of the nation of Israel, are excluded. Absolutely not. Because what is the church? The church is a beautiful blend of Jew and Gentile, Israelite and non-Israelite, all brought together through our shared faith in Jesus Christ. The parable is a rejection against the Jewish leadership of Jesus' day. And it makes the theological point that the responsibility of being God's witness and God's source of blessing to the nations has now been given to the church, comprised of Jewish followers of Jesus Christ and non-Jewish followers of Jesus Christ. I think it's an important message for us today because as members of the church, we have to remember our responsibility. We have a responsibility to make God known in the world through our acts of love and service and through our proclamation that Jesus Christ is Lord. That's why we've been called. That's our mission. And that's what we need to fulfill. So I encourage you to read Mark chapter 12 today. Thanks for continuing to pray for me. I'll continue to pray for all of you, and I look forward to seeing you in person soon.